All right, welcome to this episode of Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and we're going to be looking at the standings and the statistics after week one. We'll talk about that leading into next week, see what things look like from a standings, the NFL stats, and as well the fantasy stat leaders. All right, that sounds like a plan for this episode, so let's get started. So looking at the AFC, we'll start with the AFC. Obviously, Buffalo in the East is already in first place. Every other team lost in the AFC East. So Buffalo pretty much looks like they're on their way to winning again that division. You know, the Jets had a good game, a tight one, really could have won that game, just didn't quite pull it out against the Steelers. In the North, Cincinnati finally did have a good first week. They've been having a rough time, despite the fact that they barely won the game. They were able to pull out a win, so they're 1-0, as well as Pittsburgh being 1-0. So they're both 1-0. Baltimore, Cleveland, 0-1. In the South, same thing. You got two teams with a 1-0 record and two teams 0-1. Indianapolis and Jacksonville are both 1-0. We'll have to see how both of those teams do in their next game. Indianapolis was against Miami, who looked terrible, and Jacksonville was against the Carolina Panthers, and again, a team that was really not that good last year. So we'll see how each team does against a team that will be a little bit better. Houston, Tennessee both lost their games. Tennessee played the Broncos, so that was expected. Houston had a tough game against the Rams. Didn't look that good, so we'll see how they do. In the West, the Chargers and the Denver Broncos both came out with wins. Chargers beat Kansas City, so that's a big divisional game. They are already 1-0 in the division, so that's good for them. Nice way to start. And then Denver and Vegas also won. So three teams won, and the Kansas City Chiefs, who have won this division quite a few years in a row, are 0-1. Now, I know it's early. All right, looking at the NFC in the East, it's the Reds. Sorry about that. Way in the back past there. It's the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles are both 1-0. Dallas Cowboys and New York Giants 0-1. Kind of the way you expected it to be, even though Dallas did have a close game. In the North, and I should say also about the East, those were division games, so the Commanders and the Eagles are already 1-0 in the division, so it's a good way to start. In the North, Green Bay and Minnesota both won, while Chicago and Detroit came in with 0-1. Now, this is tough. Detroit won this division last year, and a lot of people are pushing Green Bay. We'll see how it goes. Minnesota looked horrible for 2.5 quarters to 3 quarters and came back in the fourth quarter. McCarthy was a different quarterback in the fourth quarter, and they ended up winning that game. It was a very close game against Chicago. So those are division games as well, so they're both 1-0. In the South, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the only team to win a game in that division. Atlanta, New Orleans, and Carolina all lost. Tampa Bay beat Atlanta, so they're already 1-0 in the division. In the West, flip that around from the South. In the West, San Francisco, Arizona, and the LA Rams all won their game while Seattle lost. So you, again, have 3 teams winning in that division. All right, let's take a look at the statistics for after week one. Well, first of all, we'll look at the one statistic here that makes a bit of a difference, and that's just the quarterback rating. We'll start with that. Lamar Jackson ended the week with the highest quarterback rating of 144.4. Aaron Rodgers was second with 136.7, and then Herbert came in third with 131.7. Those are your top three. On the other end of the scale, Young had a quarterback rating of 49, and Tua Tagovailoa had a quarterback rating of 51.7. He looked terrible. Young didn't look much better either. Now, Cam Ward was third at the bottom with a 54.5. He didn't look great, but he was playing against one of the best defenses in the NFL. So you have to take him with a grain of salt as far as how that went. Some of the names that were being pushed forward going into the season, like Bo Nix, was way down at the bottom with a 60 quarterback rating. Trevor Lawrence only had a 74.4. Now that one, I don't know. We'll have to play another game. That game had an hour-plus long delay in that game, as well as the fact that the team did pull out to a lead, and so just not sure what to think about that one. But we'll see. Those are some of your top and bottom players. The ones that are interesting here, I did enjoy obviously Jackson's always going to be up here. Herbert's game was one I enjoyed, seeing him throw the ball a lot more than he normally does. So he'll be somebody to watch. So let's look at the yards. Who led the NFL in yards? Now, this was Josh Allen, who did have a quarterback rating of 112. So he did have a good game. He led the NFL first week with 394 yards passing. Geno Smith had 362. So that's interesting with the Raiders. With maybe the defenses are going to focus on Gente, but Smith does have some good receivers with Bowers as a tight end and then a wide receiver. So that's a good one. And then Herbert finished with 318 yards. Those are your top three. The only three quarterbacks over 300 yards in the week one. Really was interesting that for the most part, quarterbacks play was really questionable. I mean, you have half the league where the quarterback threw less than 200 yards. So we'll see how week two goes when the offenses start to catch up a little bit to the defenses. So Josh Allen led in that category. Now in touchdowns throwing, well, that was Aaron Rodgers, threw 4 touchdowns in his game. Herbert had 3 and Mayfield had 3, which really helped out Mayfield. He didn't really throw. He only threw for 167 yards, but with the 3 touchdowns, that helped him as far as when we look at the fantasy stats. Then they had quite a few with 2 and some with 1, and there's several that didn't throw any. Sadly, you already have 5 quarterbacks that have thrown 2 interceptions. Young, Tagovailoa, he just looked bad. Flacco, Purdy, and Nix. So we'll have to see how they do. Nix throwing 2, but he did throw 40 passes. Flacco threw 45 passes. Now, Tua only threw 23 passes and had 2 interceptions. So he's throwing an interception at 8.7% rate. You really need to be under 3. So we'll see how that goes. So these guys got off a little bad start there. Now, the quarterbacks that were sacked a lot, Cam Ward, again, playing against a super tough defense, had 6 sacks. He led the week 1 with 6 sacks. Now, somebody that you were hoping wouldn't be on this is Kyler Murray. He was sacked 5 times. He's got to do something about that. He still had a good quarterback rating of 108.8, but he's just not that big of a guy. He does not need to be sacked 5 times, especially when he's only dropping back for a pass 29 times. He attempted 29 passes. Now, he might have dropped back more than that, but 5 sacks is not good. Now, Geno Smith was sacked 4 and Goff were sacked 4. They get sacked a lot. Same with Rodgers, who's the NFL all-time leader in being sacked. He had 4 as well. They have a tendency, especially like Geno Smith, of going for the deep ball, which can lead to being sacked on occasion. So that is a look at our quarterbacks. Looking at the running backs, here's only 3 running backs had over 100 yards, and that was led by Derrick Henry, who should have had even more than 18 attempts. Interesting that that's what he had, but he ended up with 169 yards on 18 carries, 2 touchdowns. He averaged over 9 yards a carry. Travis Etienne had only 16 carries, but for 143 yards for almost a 9.0 average. Didn't have any touchdowns, though. So those two were really the top two. And then Breece Hall had 107 yards rushing on 19 attempts for a 5.6 yard average. Good game for him as well. Those are the only three. I mean, Merritt for Washington had 82. That was your next best running back. Really wasn't a good game for a lot of offensive players. And when I say that, really, I mean, looking down toward the bottom of the list, some of these people like Gibbs, 19 yards. He's a first-round draft pick in fantasy. Kenneth Walker, 20 yards. These are some of the players that you expect to have better games than that. Looking up here a little bit, a lot of people were hopeful for Henderson for New England, had 27 yards. Another one people picked high, 37 yards. Connor had 39. And Brown, who a lot of people were picking in the second round, had 43 yards. So hopefully after this game and get some of that badness out of the system, you'll see better games. Barkley, who had led the NFL last year in rushing with over 2,000 yards, 18 carries for 60 yards. So not a good game for him either. So we'll see what week 2 brings. You know, obviously, it's kind of just like in the preseason and practice, you hear it all the time. The defenses often have a lead. As far as touchdowns rushing, 6 players had 2. So there was quite a few. And actually, when I say that, 4 of them were quarterbacks. So when you're actually talking about running backs, Henry had 2, and Jamal Williams for Dallas had 2, and Allen for New York Jets. Well, that was it. Only Williams for Dallas and Henry for Baltimore had 2 touchdowns rushing. Those are the only ones. All right, let's look at the receiving numbers here. Well, you had, as far as receptions go, you had 3 players with 10 receptions, and one of them being Gibbs from Detroit as a running back had 10, but he only had 31 yards on his 10 receptions. Brown for Kansas City, after, I tell you what, Kansas City's hurting as far as the wide receiver department. So Hollywood Brown looks like he could be their wide receiver for the next few games. We'll see how it goes. But he had 10 receptions for 99 yards. One of them was for 49. He had 9 more receptions for 50 yards. And he was targeted 16 times. That's the most in the NFL this past week. 16 times, 10 receptions. Now, like I said, Gibbs was targeted 10 times and caught 10 passes, but only for 31 yards. Puka Nakua was the other one with 10 receptions on 11 targets, so he was much more efficient than Brown. Had 10 receptions for 130 yards, so he had a really good game. No touchdowns for any of those 3, though. Another running back who was close was McCaffrey, had 9 receptions for 73 yards, no touchdowns. I think you'll be seeing a lot of him because San Francisco just lost their tight end, Kittle, for at least 4 weeks. So you could see even more catches by McCaffrey. He's moving up the list all time as far as receiving touchdowns, yards, and so forth. So we'll watch him. But those are your top. Smith-Njigba for Seattle also had 9. Those were the top 5 with 10 or 9 receptions. He had 9 receptions for 124 yards. None of them had any touchdowns, which is very interesting. Now for the yardage, Zay Flowers on 7 catches had 143 yards and 1 touchdown. He averaged over 20 yards of reception, so he was the leading receiver as far as yards go. Puka Nakua had 130 yards, like I said. Now, back to Flowers. I don't know if this is going to be the way it always is. He's definitely the leading receiver, but he's often, to me, somewhat hit or miss, I guess I should say. Is he going to be this way every week where he's going to be focused and have 7 receptions? We'll have to see. He was targeted 9 times, so he's definitely the leading guy. I'm just never comfortable with him and what's going to happen week in, week out. So Nakua had 130 yards. Smith-Njigba had 124 on 9 receptions. He was targeted 13 times, so he's definitely the guy now that Lockett and Metcalf are gone. And Kupp really did not have a good game. So we should see a lot of games like this where Smith-Njigba is being targeted a lot, and he should be racking up some good yardage. Coleman for Buffalo had 8 catches on 11 targets for 112 yards. And again, he's another one. Is this only because they had to come back in that game and Allen was throwing it, the entire fortunate that they won, but they were the whole fourth quarter. It's pretty much throwing the ball. So I don't expect to see Coleman up here every week. Now, CeeDee Lamb had 110 yards on 7 catches. He was targeted 13 times, so not very efficient as far as that goes. 110 yards for him. Now, Pearsall he should even do better. He had only 4 catches, but he had 108 yards. He was targeted 7 times. I expect to see that go up now that Kittle's out of the game for at least a month. So Pearsall could even do better in the coming weeks. Another interesting one is Butte for New England. 6 catches on 8 targets for 103 yards. He could be their number 1 wide receiver. I mean, it was kind of watching to see how Diggs was doing, but I don't know that Diggs has it left in him to be the number 1 guy. He might be kind of pushed back to number 2. So Butte could really be the guy for New England. Douglas hasn't been that impressive. Now, as far as the next one, Bowers, first tight end on this list, had 103 yards on 5 catches. He was targeted 8 times. So he's coming through as a tight end. He's coming through and deserving his number 1 tight end status. And if you picked him early, you're really happy about how he did. And then the last one is Robinson, running back, only running back on this list. So he made it with 6 catches for 100 yards. These are the only receivers to have 100 or more yards. So you had quite a few. You actually had 9 with 100 or more yards. But Robinson had 6 catches for 100 yards on 7 targets. One of them was a 50-yard touchdown. Really was fun to watch him. So we could see a big season out of him if they continue to throw the ball to him like that. And Penix likes to go down the field, but he's very good at gauging the field, the defense, and he will dump it off, and Robinson benefited from that. All right. Now looking at the defense real quick. As far as interceptions, there's a ton of people with 1. We won't look at that until it extends itself out. And as far as sacks go already, Landry for New England had 2.5 sacks. So he's leading the NFL currently in sacks. You had 5 players with 2, including Myles Garrett for Cleveland. So those are some of your big names there as far as that goes. So we'll watch that. But some players have gotten off to a good start in the sack category. All right. Let's look at one more stat here real quick, and that is tackles for loss. That was Myles Garrett. So not only did he have 2 sacks, he had 4 tackles for loss to lead every defensive player this first week. Now, Will Anderson had 3 and a sack. Harold Landry, like I said, he had 2.5 sacks to lead for New England, had 2.5 sacks. He also had 3 tackles for loss, so he had a big game as well. So really impressive start for those 2 players. So that's your players as far as your defensive players. All right, let's look at the fantasy numbers now. See what we're expecting there. When we're looking at that, this is PPR I'm talking about here. So number 1 player, we'll start off looking at the overall numbers, but the number 1 fantasy player last week was Josh Allen, and with 38.8 points to lead everybody by a long distance. Justin Fields, who had a really good game, had 29.5, as well as Daniel Jones, 29.5. So two players you didn't expect to necessarily see up there, even though a lot of people have been putting their money on Justin Fields. Now, Lamar Jackson was fourth with 29.4, so he was up there. The first non-quarterback was Derrick Henry with 29.2, and the first wide receiver or non-running back was Zay Flowers with 28.1. So those are your top players overall. Let's look at just the quarterbacks and see how they did. All right. Looking at the quarterbacks, like I said, Josh Allen was number one with 38.8. Justin Fields second, 29.5 for the Jets. Now, Daniel Jones tied him with 29.5 for Indianapolis. Lamar Jackson was fourth with 29.4. And then there's a drop off of a couple points, 1.5 to Justin Herbert with 27.9. Mahomes ended up with 26. Really, I don't know. He had a decent game. And Aaron Rodgers was seventh with 25.7, but that's because he had 4 touchdown passes. You cannot expect him to be up here week in, week out like that. He's not throwing 4 touchdowns, and he didn't throw for that many yards either. So he was very efficient with his passes, I put it that way. Jalen Hurts, 8th with 24.3. Caleb Williams, 9th with 24.2. And Michael Penix, 24 points. So those are your top 10. And then it was a drop-off again after that. But those are your top 10. Out of those, obviously, you're always going to stick with Allen and Lamar Jackson. Fields is definitely somebody to watch. You knew he could run, and it was just his passing ability, but he does seem to have improved there as well. So with Garrett Wilson as his top wide receiver, definitely looks like somebody that you might think about. And Justin Herbert, if they continue to pass the ball like they did, he's definitely a guy you're going to see in the top 10. Mahomes, I still want to see, and if his receivers continue to get hurt, I don't know. He'll be throwing a lot, but I just don't know how he's going to do overall. So those are your top ones. Jalen Hurts, again, he should always be up there, but his passing game, I still don't trust that. So Michael Penix is another one, but he is mostly going to have to rely on the arm for him, and that's a question. The only one you would normally see that way is Burrows, who was terrible. If you pick Burrows, which a lot of people did, including myself, as far as quarterbacks go, he just had a very rough game. He only had 8.8 points. Just a terrible game. He's one of those that you were being picked in the top 4 or 5. The rest of them, like Allen, Jackson, Hurts, they were all up there in the top 10 like they were supposed to be. But not Burrow. We'll see how it goes this next week. They did have a rough start. They always seem to be, even though they won, but he just did not have a good game. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Let's look at the running backs and see how they did. Obviously, this is going to be Derrick Henry. Even in a PPR, he crushed it. He doesn't catch a lot of passes, but he had 29.2 points. The next one was Bijan Robinson, who had 24.4, who did not have a good rushing game, but he had a lot of yards receiving. So those are your top 2. Derrick Henry crushed it by almost 5 points over the second best player. And then Christian McCaffrey was third with 23.2, which is really a good number when you consider that he did not have a touchdown, which is going to be a rarity that he does not score a touchdown. So I expect to see him, if he continues to be the offensive juggernaut for the 49ers, he's going to have some touchdowns too. So I would almost guarantee that he'll be possibly the number 1 running back next week. And then you had another drop down to James Cook with 21.2, and Javonte Williams, for Dallas, had 20.4. I don't expect to see that all the time either. He had 2 touchdowns. He will be the guy, but I just don't know. James Cook, he had 16 touchdowns last year, so you could factor in that he will be up around these numbers fairly frequently, just based on the fact that he does get some touchdowns, despite Josh Allen also stealing touchdowns a lot of times. Now, Travis Etienne was 6th at 18.6. And again, that's not a bad number because that's only on touches, rushing, and he did have some receptions, but he had no touchdowns. So, you throw in a touchdown here and his numbers jump quite a bit. But he was 6th. So I expect it'd be interesting. Now they traded the Jaguars I'm talking about traded Travis Bigby. So Etienne's definitely number 1 with Tootin now number 2, and we'll see how that goes. And if this stays this way, as long as Travis Etienne is playing this well, I think that's going to keep Tootin as this number 2 guy. But we'll see as the season goes on. Now, Saquon Barkley, who is definitely the number 1 or 2 running back taken off the board, one of the top few anyway, had 18.4. Didn't have that great a game, but he still ended up with 18.4. So only had 60 yards rushing. So we'll see how that goes. I bet he definitely starts moving up the board. Those are your top 7. The only ones over 18 points. You had 2 more over 17. Chuba Hubbard, who should be in the top 10 regularly. He's definitely the guy for Carolina, and they would like to feed him the ball. And he caught several passes out of the backfield as well. And then Dylan Sampson, I don't expect him to be up there. He had 17.3. I don't expect to see him up here for long. Cleveland finally signed Judkins, so how that's going to work out between the 3 of them, including Ford, I just don't see Sampson averaging 17 points a game. And then finally in 10th was Devon Achane, who had 16.5, as well as Breece Hall, who also had 16.5. Those are interesting now ones to watch. Breece Hall was somebody that everybody was shying away from with all the chatter coming out of the Jets organization, but he did have a really good game. So we'll see how it goes with him. Now, looking at some of them that did not perform that well, Jamar Gibbs had 15 points, but he's somebody you expect to be in the top 5, somebody that should be over 20 points a game, every game. In fact, pushing, even higher than that, 25 or so points. So he really had a bad game. Bucky Irving's another one who you expected to see higher. He only had 14.5 points. And then Kyron Williams had 13.9 and Chase Brown had 13.1. These are all people that were picked in the first couple of rounds, maybe the third at the latest. Same with Jonathan Taylor, had 12.8. And then Ashton Genty, who was picked often in the first or second round, had 12 points. So everybody's going to be hoping for a lot better games from those players going into this upcoming week. We'll see how it goes as they move away from the first game. All right, let's look at the wide receivers and see who did well. Like I said already, it was Zay Flowers by a decent amount. He had 28.1 points. Keon Coleman had 25.2, coming second. And again, I don't expect to see that every week. That had to do more with game scripts, having to come from behind. They were so far behind, they had to throw the ball a lot. Quentin Johnston had 24.9. Another one I don't expect to see up here. I think that's more of a fluke than anything. Now, Emeka Egbuka, 23.6. This is one that I do expect, even though he is a rookie, I do expect to see him up here every week, at least until Godwin comes back. We'll see. But him, along with Mike Evans, make a good tandem. And Buka looked good. He really did look good. He just plucks the ball out of the air. Puka Nakua was fifth, with 23.1, and you expect to see him up there every week. Now, 6 was Deebo Samuel with 22.6. There was a lot of good talk about him, and he is the guy that isn't going to – what I should say is they're making it possible for him to get open a lot. He's running various types of routes. He's moving all over the place. And he's just a nice dump off for Daniels. So he could be up here. He's one I'll be watching. Garrett Wilson had a good game, 22.5. And with Justin Fields' ability for the Jets to move around and the willingness to throw it deep, you could see Garrett Wilson have a really good year this year. So he was 7th. And the last one that had 20 or more points, there's only 8 wide receivers that had 20 or more points, and that's Michael Pittman for Indianapolis. Jones looked decent, and when Pittman seems to have the ability to get open quite a bit, and I think Jones will be looking his way. Now, whether he can stay in the top 10 or not is another question, but he did have a good game with 20 points. All right, those are your top 8. The only ones, like I said, with more than 20 points, 20 or more points. Some of them that you probably were hoping would do better. Marvin Harrison didn't do bad, 18.1, probably about where you hoped. CeeDee Lamb, obviously, you're hoping he's up there at number 1 spot and pushing 25 plus points a game. He only had 18 points. Justin Jefferson, another one, had only 14.8. He's another one you're hoping there's going to be more around the 25. So he's, about 10 points off of what you're hoping for. So he didn't have that great of a game either. And again, that's because Minnesota, almost like they didn't show up. At least McCarthy didn't show up for the first 3 quarters. So Justin Jefferson saved his game, only had 4 receptions, but he saved it with a touchdown reception. That's how he even got to 14.8. I definitely see better numbers coming from him. Drake London had 13.5. I don't know. He got hurt late in the game, and we'll see how he's doing. Ladd McConkey only had 13.4. And again, I don't know if it was just the game script or whatever. Quentin Johnston stole the show for the Chargers. And with Keenan Allen, I don't know how McConkey's going to do. He was one of those picked high, much higher. Not like Lamb or Jefferson, but up there to probably average closer to 20 points. I don't know that I see it with when you have 3 decent receivers, Johnston, McConkey, and Allen. So we'll see. Those are some of them. Now, Malik Neighbors is one more. Only had 12.1 points for the Giants. You definitely want to see it higher there for him. And the last one, I'll just say, because he's another rookie, and these 2 guys have been batting it back and forth as to who might be the better one. That's Tedero McMillan for Carolina, had 11.8 points, while Egbuka for Tampa had 23.6. So we'll watch to see those 2 rookies and how they do. And one more, that's Mike Evans. I just saw him. He's way down the list, only had 10 points. He's somebody I don't normally pick. You can put him at 1,000 yards, but he's very touchdown dependent. He does get a lot of touchdown receptions. So you could see him have a bounce back game this next week. And often that's the way it is. If he has a down game, he has a good game after that. One more, Amon-Ra St. Brown only had 8.5 points. I don't know. We'll have to watch and see how the offense as a whole goes for Detroit, since they lost their offensive coordinator and the new one's in. Plus, who's going to be the top wide receiver? Is it going to continue to be St. Brown? That's something we'll have to watch. So those are your receivers, wide receivers. Take one more peek here at tight ends. Look who racked it up. And this is going to be interesting this year. And some of these, every year there is a new tight end. And is it Juwan Johnson this year? Number 1, wide tight end, with 15.6 points. Brock Bowers was second with 15.3. Those are your only ones over 15 points. Here's a guy, Tyler Warren, to watch for Indianapolis. Really he looked good, had a good game with 14.9. Dalton Kincaid, is he back after last year with 14.8? Or again, was it simply game script that forced him to have so many points in the PPR? Sam Laporta had a good game. Is he back with 13.9 for Detroit? He could. And if he is back, how was that say about St. Brown, Another one that's interesting, this rookie here for Cleveland, Harold Fannin, had 13.6. Is he going to stay there, or is Njoku, the other tight end for Cleveland, going to hinder him there? He's one I'll be watching. Johnson's the one I'm really interested in. I've been able to pick him up in a few leagues because if he does stick out, he had quite a few targets. I think it was 11 targets his ways. Rattler seemed to, when he needed to, he dumped it off to Johnson. So it's something to watch. Another one, Kyle Pitts had 12.9. So there's only 6 players that had over 13 points and really over 13 and a half. Kyle Pitts, it drops down to him with 12.9. And again, is he back? Could he be somebody that you want to stick with? We'll see. There was a lot of good chatter, and he did have a decent game with 12.9. Those are your top ones. Unfortunately, George Kittle got hurt. He had 12.5 points, but he's out now for a month. Trey McBride had 12.1. So just finishing outside the top 10. Those are the only 12 players with 12 points, though. Those are your top 3. Bowers, as far as drafting went going into this season. We'll see how they hold out to some of these guys that popped up on this list. This will be interesting to watch. All right, so those are some of your offensive players going in. The interesting ones will be Johnson. If you can pick him up, you might want to pick him up. He is available in a lot of leagues. I don't think, in fact, if you're quick enough, you should be able to pick him up and add him to your roster. If you don't have Bowers or McBride, he could be the guy for you. He's available in almost every league, so you might want to check him out as far as tight ends go. All right, that's our look at the NFL this week. Moving into week 2. Tomorrow, I'll be beginning a preview of the week 2 games, including the Thursday night game. So that's something to look forward to. Appreciate you watching or listening if you happen to be watching on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. Otherwise, you can catch me on Spotify, any Apple, on Apple or should be on any of your podcast sources. You can contact me on YouTube. Just leave a comment there, or Facebook, X, Instagram, all at Just the Stats NFL. Email, it's justthestatsnfl@gmail.com. Appreciate you listening. And that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I'm out.